Detective Ryan Calder sat in a small classroom inside an old training facility in Chicago. The walls were bare, the air smelled of dust, and the pressure was heavy. He had been called back for an evaluation that would decide if he still deserved to wear a badge. It wasn't just a routine check. He would have to face the same levels of investigation training he once passed years ago, each one harder than the last. Failure here would mean the end of his career, and that thought weighed heavily on him. Ryan's daily life as a detective had become a grind. Endless paperwork, long nights, and mistakes that haunted him. He often felt he was slipping behind younger detectives who seemed sharper and more confident. Doubt clung to him like a shadow, and even the smallest error felt like proof that he was losing his edge. Returning to training wasn't just about skills, it was about facing the fear that he might no longer belong. For Ryan, walking into that classroom felt like stepping back into the most difficult chapter of his past. The head instructor wasted no time laying out the stakes. Ryan was told bluntly, pass the evaluations or hand in his badge. There would be no retakes, no sympathy, and no hiding. Every move would be recorded, every hesitation judged. Sitting in that room, surrounded by younger trainees, Ryan felt the weight of eyes on him, waiting to see if the veteran would break. The clock was already ticking. This wasn't about brushing up on skills. It was survival in a world where failure meant losing not just a career, but a part of his identity. The first task began with surveillance. Ryan was placed in a crowded street simulation, filled with actors moving naturally, blending into the environment. His job was to track a suspect without losing him. His hands sweated and his eyes darted too quickly, almost giving himself away. At one point, he nearly lost sight of the man. Panic surged, reminding him of cases where his judgment had slipped. But he steadied his breathing and forced himself to slow down. Just when it seemed hopeless, he noticed a small gesture the suspect made, and it saved him from complete failure. After the surveillance test, Ryan sat in silence, replaying every mistake in his head. The instructors didn't reveal their evaluation, only nodding briefly before moving on. That uncertainty cut deeper than outright criticism. His self-doubt grew heavier, and he wondered if he had only been lucky. If the entire evaluation depended on chance, he knew he couldn't survive it. Still, he pushed forward into the next test. What he didn't realize was that each level wasn't just about skill, it was about exposing weaknesses that most detectives kept buried. His would be pulled into the light. The second test was interrogation training. Ryan was placed in a small room with an actor playing a stubborn suspect. The man stonewalled every question, mocking Ryan's attempts to control the conversation. Ryan's doubts made him hesitate, and he almost snapped under the pressure. He remembered past failures where witnesses slipped away because he couldn't push hard enough. But then, a detail in the man's story didn't line up, and Ryan caught it. He leaned on that detail, pressing until the actor cracked. It was a win, but the delay had shown everyone just how shaky Ryan had become. Ryan left the interrogation room with his heart pounding. The instructors scribbled notes, their faces unreadable. He hated the feeling of being studied like a broken tool. Other trainees seemed confident, but Ryan knew better than to trust appearances. His doubts replayed on loop. What if the instructors only saw hesitation? What if they already decided he didn't belong? The silence around him was suffocating. He thought about his years on the force and wondered if they meant anything now. In this facility, past experience didn't matter. Only how he performed today would decide if he walked out with his badge. The third test was staged crime scene analysis. Ryan was thrown into a cluttered apartment filled with scattered evidence. Some objects were planted as distractions, while others mattered. He scanned the room, but his mind worked too slowly. Every choice felt like a gamble. He wasted time chasing false leads and ignored things that seemed too obvious. As the clock ticked down, he felt failure closing in. But then, at the last second, he spotted a crucial item overlooked by everyone else. A set of keys with numbers etched into them. That detail shifted the whole case in his favor. Even with the small win, Ryan's frustration mounted. He had walked right into obvious traps, and the instructors had seen it all. His self-doubt whispered that he was failing, that the real detectives would have breezed through without hesitation. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't show weakness. The other trainees looked sharper, faster, and more confident. Ryan had experience, but it felt like a burden rather than a strength. The harder he tried to keep up, the more mistakes he seemed to make. He couldn't shake the fear that this evaluation was already slipping out of his hands. During a break, Ryan noticed something unsettling. One of the younger trainees, a man named Lewis, kept watching him too closely. At first, Ryan dismissed it as curiosity, but soon he realized Lewis was deliberately interfering. During exercises, Lewis would nudge evidence out of place or whisper misleading hints. It was subtle enough to avoid detection, but enough to trip Ryan up. Anger boiled inside him, but so did confusion. Why would another trainee try to sabotage him? Ryan began to suspect this was more than a simple evaluation. It felt like someone wanted him to fail for good. When the next test began, Ryan's suspicion turned into certainty. He caught Lewis planting misleading notes during an evidence review, trying to steer him toward false conclusions. Ryan's first instinct was to confront him, but self-doubt held him back. What if it wasn't sabotage? What if it was another trap designed by the instructors? The line between reality and simulation blurred. Ryan forced himself to focus on the case instead. He ignored Lewis's hints and trusted his instincts, uncovering a hidden connection that saved the exercise. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being set up. By now, Ryan's flaw, his constant self-doubt, was tearing him apart. Every test pushed against it, and every success felt fragile. He began to wonder if this entire evaluation was designed to expose him. If so, it was working. His hands shook before each exercise, and he replayed every wrong move in his head. Worse, he started to feel isolated, unsure who he could trust. Even small interactions with instructors felt like tricks. Ryan realized that unless he found a way to push through his doubt, he wouldn't survive the next challenges. The weight of failure pressed harder with each passing hour. The fourth test was a loyalty trap. Ryan was paired with another trainee and asked to log evidence from a staged scene. His partner intentionally mislabeled an item, then whispered that it would save time if they just let it slide. Ryan knew what the instructors wanted, a choice between covering up the mistake or risking confrontation. His self-doubt screamed that calling it out might make him look difficult, or worse, disloyal, but his stubborn sense of honesty wouldn't let him ignore it. He reported the error, even as he braced himself for whatever consequences would follow. The room fell silent when Ryan spoke up. Instructors exchanged looks, and the partner glared at him. Ryan couldn't tell if he had passed or failed. Had he proven loyalty to the truth, or exposed himself as uncooperative? The uncertainty ate at him, but he couldn't take it back. For once, he hadn't given in to doubt. He had stood his ground. That moment lingered as the instructors moved on without comment. Ryan felt the weight of every decision pressing down harder. This wasn't about catching criminals anymore. It was about whether he could trust himself enough to keep going. The instructors didn't reveal the results, but Ryan noticed subtle signs. A few nodded slightly, others scribbled longer notes. He couldn't read their reactions, which only deepened his anxiety. His partner's hostility, though, was clear. Ryan was certain the other trainees now saw him as a threat. He had chosen honesty, but it left him more isolated than ever, alone in that facility, with no allies he could trust. Ryan's doubts began to whisper again. What if honesty didn't matter? What if this system rewarded silence instead? He carried that fear into the next stage, unsure what awaited him. The next challenge pushed him deeper. Ryan was assigned to reconstruct a timeline from scattered evidence, but halfway through, Lewis interfered again. This time, Lewis openly swapped items when no one was looking. Ryan caught it but hesitated. If he exposed him, he might sound paranoid. If he stayed quiet, the evidence would point in the wrong direction. His self-doubt froze him in place. In the end, he forced himself to call it out. The instructors paused, studying both men carefully. The line between training exercise and personal sabotage had completely blurred. Ryan realized he was in over his head. The fifth and final test arrived, a simulated hostage crisis. Ryan and several trainees were given files, clues, and a strict time limit. The goal was to locate the hostage before the clock ran out. It was the kind of exercise meant to break even the strongest candidates. Ryan started methodically, but Lewis once again moved to sabotage him, feeding false leads to the group. Panic spread among the trainees as the clock ticked down. Ryan felt crushed between the pressure of failure and the growing certainty that Lewis was more than just a rival. Something bigger was happening here. At one point during the hostage simulation, Ryan nearly quit. Every instinct told him he was failing, that Lewis's interference had already doomed the team. He saw flashes of his past mistakes, moments where his hesitation had cost dearly. The thought of reliving those failures filled him with dread. For a brief moment, he almost walked away, ready to accept the end of his career. But then he forced himself to stop. He realized that if he left now, he wouldn't just lose his badge, he would prove to himself that doubt had finally destroyed him. That wasn't acceptable. Ryan took a risk. Instead of following the group's scattered efforts, he trusted his instincts and revisited the first file he had been given. There he spotted a minor detail that had seemed irrelevant at the time. A phone number scrawled in the margin, one no one else had noticed. When he traced it against the other evidence, it connected directly to the hostage's supposed location. He shared his finding, but the others hesitated. Lewis pushed back hard, claiming Ryan was wrong. It was Ryan's word against his, and the instructors watched closely. The entire evaluation now hinged on trust. Ryan followed the lead anyway, ignoring Lewis's protests. He guided the group toward the new location, piecing the evidence together step by step. When they finally uncovered the hostage, it matched his conclusion perfectly. The room fell silent. The instructors nodded, while Lewis avoided eye contact. For the first time, Ryan realized the sabotage wasn't random. It was part of the test. The betrayal, the pressure, even his self-doubt had all been manipulated to see how he would respond. The truth hit him hard. He had been evaluated on more than skills. His resilience was the real target. The instructors revealed that everything, from the staged sabotage to the false clues, had been designed to push him past his breaking point. Ryan stood frozen, unsure how to react. On one hand, relief washed over him. He hadn't been imagining it. On the other, he felt anger at being toyed with. His years of service, his doubt, his pain, all turned into tools for their experiment. Yet he couldn't deny what it had revealed. He had endured every trap and still found the right answers. The room was quiet, waiting for him to recognize what he had proven to himself. Ryan's perspective shifted. For years he had treated self-doubt as a weakness, something to be ashamed of. But in this training, it had forced him to check details, to slow down, to question what others overlooked. That flaw had kept him from blindly following false leads. What he thought was holding him back had saved him more than once. For the first time, he saw his doubt differently, not as a chain, but as a tool. The instructors nodded knowingly, as if waiting for him to come to this realization. Ryan finally understood what the training had been about. As the evaluation ended, Ryan expected a simple pass or fail. Instead, the lead instructor told him the decision wasn't theirs, it was his. He had to choose whether he still believed he belonged in this profession. It was a test of self-acceptance more than skill. Ryan stood in silence, weighing the choice. His doubts still whispered, but now he recognized them for what they were, a part of him, not a sentence. Slowly, he nodded. He wasn't perfect, but he was still capable. That moment mattered more than any evidence or stage scenario ever could. The instructors congratulated him, but without celebration. It was quiet, professional acknowledgement. Ryan walked out of the room, feeling heavier and lighter at the same time. He hadn't conquered his flaw, but he had learned to live with it. The other trainees watched him differently now, some with respect, others with caution. Even Lewis, the plant in the exercise, gave him a nod of recognition. Ryan didn't need their approval anymore. For the first time in years, he felt grounded. He had proven he could survive the hardest levels of training, and more importantly, survive himself. Back in the city streets outside the facility, Ryan looked at the badge in his hand. It was the same badge he had carried for years, but it felt different now. He thought about the levels of training he had endured: surveillance, interrogation, crime scene analysis, loyalty traps, and crisis management. Each one had nearly broken him, but each one had revealed something deeper. The badge was no longer just a symbol of authority, it was a reminder of resilience. Ryan knew the job wouldn't get easier, but now he carried the proof that he could handle it. In the weeks that followed, Ryan returned to his precinct. Colleagues noticed a shift in him. He wasn't suddenly confident or flawless, but he carried himself differently. When cases grew tense, he stayed steady instead of spiraling into panic. He still second-guessed himself, but he used that hesitation to check details no one else noticed. His flaw hadn't vanished, but he had learned to channel it. His superiors recognized the change, though few knew what he had endured. The training facility had done more than test him. It had reshaped the way he understood himself and his work. Ryan also realized something important. The levels of training weren't just about building detectives. They were about stripping away illusions. Most people walked in believing they were strong, only to discover hidden weaknesses. For Ryan, it had been the opposite. He had walked in with crushing doubt, only to discover it could be turned into strength. That irony stayed with him, shaping how he viewed others. He became more patient with younger detectives, knowing they were probably battling flaws of their own. The training hadn't just saved his career, it had changed the way he led. The final lesson came when Ryan was handed a difficult case in the field. The details were messy, with conflicting witnesses and planted evidence. It reminded him of the stage scenarios in training. He slowed down, checked every angle, and trusted his instincts. The case broke open in a way no one expected, and for the first time, Ryan didn't dismiss his success as luck. He saw it for what it was: growth. The training had left scars, but it had also given him tools. Ryan realized he was no longer the same detective who had walked into that facility. In the end, Ryan knew the levels of investigation training weren't just hoops to jump through. They were mirrors, forcing detectives to confront who they really were under pressure. For him, the journey had been painful, but necessary. He hadn't erased his self-doubt, but he had finally understood it. The badge on his chest felt earned in a new way, not because of perfection, but because of perseverance. Walking out into the city he served, Ryan carried both his flaws and his strengths, ready for whatever came next. His story wasn't perfect, but it was finally his.